Yeah, we had an interesting casting challenge.
Fargo opened in 1996 with 5 words that changed everything. This is a true story. Critics called it a masterpiece. Roger Ebert said it was one of the best films he'd ever seen. Journalists searched Minnesota police records for months trying to find the real case. They found nothing. Then, in 2001, a Japanese woman died in a snow-covered field, and newspapers claimed she was hunting for the movie's buried money. This is the story of how 2 brothers fooled an entire industry and got away with it. Joel and Ethan Coen did not come from some loud Hollywood bubble. They came from St. Louis Park, Minnesota, a quiet suburb outside Minneapolis, where the days feel steady and people talk like the weather is part of the family. Their dad, Edward Coen, taught economics at the University of Minnesota, and he had the same simple routine, walking to the bus stop every morning. Their mom, Rena, taught art history for 27 years, and that meant stories, images, and details were always floating around the house. So while the brothers were growing up in the 1960s and 1970s, they were quietly collecting everything around them: the wheat fields, the farming towns, the polite small talk, and those accents that sound soft until you realize they can cut through you when the room goes cold. They hung out at a local soda fountain called Mike Zoss Drugs so often that the name stuck in their heads, and later they used it for their production company. It sounds small, but that is the point. Those little places and tiny habits became the backbone of what they would build later, especially in Fargo, where the rhythm of speech and the awkward warmth of the Midwest are not just background, they are the heartbeat. Still, Fargo did not come out of nowhere. The brothers pulled pieces from real life, the kind of real life that feels too ugly and too strange to be true, until you remember people can do anything when money and pride get mixed with panic. One thread came from the 1986 murder of Helle Crafts. On November 19, 1986, Helle, who was 39, was killed at her home in Connecticut, and the story that followed was brutal. Her husband, Richard Crafts, struck her with a blunt object, froze her body for hours, and then used a chainsaw and a wood chipper to dispose of her remains. Police found blood on the bed, and later they found traces of bone in the wood chipper debris. Richard was arrested, and after a mistrial, he was convicted and sentenced to 50 years in prison. Then there was another thread, less bloody, but just as sick in its own way, the story of John McNamara, a car dealer who, between 1980 and 1991, defrauded General Motors of about $6 billion by getting loans for vehicles that never existed. That fraud helped him build a $400 million business empire powered by deceit and bribery. When you put those 2 kinds of stories side by side, the horror and the greed, you start to see the shape of Fargo, a world where people tell small lies, then bigger ones. Then suddenly they are standing in snow with a problem they cannot bury. And here is where the Coens did something that made the whole movie feel even sharper. From the very first moment, they decided to tell the audience it was real. Fargo opens with the line, "This is a true story." The events depicted took place in Minnesota in 1987. That single claim changed how people watched everything that came after. Joel Coen explained in interviews that when audiences believe something is true, they accept extreme events more easily, without stopping to question every strange turn. Of course, the problem was that viewers then started hunting for the exact case, the exact town, the exact bodies. But the Coens later admitted the story was completely made up, and they liked the fog that created. The murders that helped inspire pieces of the mood did not even happen in Minnesota. And the plot itself was fiction, but the words at the start made it feel like you were watching someone else's nightmare, not a screenplay. That choice also fit perfectly with where they were in their careers. After the Hudsucker Proxy in 1994, failed at the box office and got mixed reviews, they did not want another big, shiny, stylized swing. They wanted to strip everything back, so they shifted from big set pieces and grand camera moves into something colder, simpler, and more real. Fargo was shot on a modest budget, and it leaned hard into location work in Minnesota and nearby areas, letting natural spaces do the heavy lifting. The look became plain on purpose: natural light, quiet rooms, wide, empty snow, and people standing too far apart. It was the opposite of spectacle. Then it worked. Fargo became both a critical and commercial win, and it ended up winning 2 Academy Awards, proving that smaller choices can hit harder than bigger ones. Even the writing itself carried that same double game. The film opens by insisting it is true, but it ends with a disclaimer about fictional persons, and that push and pull was not an accident. The Coens described it as the moral ambiguity of lying about lying, because the movie is inspired by real events in a loose way, yet most of the characters and the story are invented. They wanted you to trust the voice, then feel that trust wobble, then keep watching anyway. That is why Fargo feels believable even when it gets absurd, and why it stays in your head long after the credits. Then the casting started adding its own stories, and those stories matched the movie's energy. Desperate people chasing what they want and refusing to let go. William H. Macy was told he was not right for Jerry Lundegaard, and he did not take the hint. In 1995, he heard about the audition and drove from New York to the Coens' office in Minnesota. He spent the entire night preparing, studying the script, building the role like his life depended on it. The next morning, he auditioned with so much heat that the Coens were impressed. But then, Macy found out they were still auditioning people back in New York. So he flew back, crashed their casting session, and basically demanded the part. When they asked why he was so desperate, he joked he would shoot Ethan Coen's dog if he did not get the role. It was wild, it was risky, and it worked. Macy landed the part, and Jerry Lundegaard became one of the clearest portraits of pathetic ambition ever put on screen. Frances McDormand had a different kind of pressure. Yes, she was married to Joel Coen, but she still had to audition for Marge Gunderson. The Coens treated it like a real casting process, and McDormand prepared like she was any other actor walking into that room. She did not push the quirks too hard. She played Marge with calm strength, warmth, and sharp focus, like a decent person who refuses to be fooled. Critics locked onto it immediately. Roger Ebert called Fargo one of the best films I've ever seen, and called her performance remarkable. Then, in 1997, she won the Academy Award for Best Actress, becoming one of the few actresses to win an Oscar for a film written and directed by her spouse. The connection might have opened the door, but the performance is what made the door stay open. Steve Buscemi brought the chaos, and the Coens knew exactly what they were doing with him. They had worked with him before, and they wrote Carl Showalter with Buscemi in mind because he could turn nervous energy into a full storm. Carl talks too much, reacts too fast, and keeps making choices that push the whole plan toward disaster. He forgets to put tags on the getaway car, tries to bribe a state trooper, and later hides the ransom money under a snow-covered field, marking the spot with a tiny windshield scraper. It is almost funny, until you realize how deadly that kind of stupidity becomes. Right beside him was Peter Stormer as Geir Grimsrud, the terrifying quiet one. Stormer barely needed dialogue. Geir says only a handful of lines, but his actions are the kind you cannot forget. He snaps, "I need unguent," when bitten. He murders a state trooper like it means nothing. And when Carl complains too much, Geir kills him with an axe. The Coens praised Stormar's vacant stare because it made Geir feel like a blank wall you cannot reason with. And through all of it, the accent became its own character. The cast had to master an exaggerated Minnesota sound, and the Coens pushed for authenticity, even if it meant weeks of rehearsal with dialect coaches. When the film premiered, some Minnesotans joked their kids asked, "We don't speak like that, do we?" And parents would admit, "Actually, you do." It turned into a cultural argument. Some people called it offensive. Others saw it as a loving joke that still held truth. Even the Coens admitted they exaggerated the patterns for comedy, and that is why phrases like "you betcha" and "oh yeah" spread worldwide and started shaping how people imagined Minnesota, even if they had never been there. What makes it even crazier is how tight the whole production was. Fargo was made in 1996 for about $7 million, which was tiny compared to the kinds of Hollywood thrillers that often cost $20 to $40 million or more. That low budget forced practical choices everywhere. Props and locations were found cheaply or borrowed. Salaries were lower than what many of those actors would later command. The shoot moved fast, mainly in Minnesota and North Dakota, and the results looked richer than the money suggested. Then the movie exploded, making over $60 million worldwide, returning nearly 10 times its investment and showing the industry that smart, tight filmmaking could stand toe-to-toe with bigger studio machines. Even the weather tried to ruin it. The Coens planned to shoot in Minnesota winter for the real bleak look, but the winter of 1995 was unusually warm, with very little snow in central and southern Minnesota, where they originally wanted to film. So the crew had to chase the cold. They drove hundreds of miles north into northern Minnesota and even into North Dakota to find deep snow. Some outdoor scenes needed snow trucked in from colder areas. Crews worked in sub-zero temperatures, fighting equipment problems. And sometimes scenes had to be reshot because snow melted overnight and continuity fell apart. That struggle ended up helping the film, because the cold you see on screen is not fake. The exhaustion is not acting. The snow feels like it is pressing down on everyone, like the landscape itself is judging them. And then there is the wood chipper scene, the moment people still talk about like they witnessed it in real life. It was inspired by that 1986 Connecticut case, and the Coens wanted it to feel raw without leaning on CGI, which was rare and expensive in 1996. So they built a realistic wood chipper prop and choreographed the scene carefully. It took days to film. The blood and the remains were synthetic materials and food coloring, but the effect was so convincing that it shocked audiences and locked itself into movie history. To keep the world feeling real, they scouted actual locations instead of building fake sets. They shot in real diners, real police spaces, real parking garages, letting the environment feel lived in. The ransom drop was filmed in 2 adjacent parking garages on South 8th Street in downtown Minneapolis, and they hired local extras to fill scenes with faces that looked like they belonged there. They even cast several local non-actors, which made the whole thing feel less like a movie and more like a terrible story you overheard and wish you had not. Then the release strategy matched the movie's quiet confidence. Fargo opened in only 36 theaters in the United States on March 8, 1996. That is nothing by Hollywood standards, especially for a crime story. But the plan was word of mouth, letting strong reviews and buzz pull people in. It worked. The opening weekend grossed $730,165, and then the film expanded to 716 theaters, over a 9.5-week average run per theater. It grew slowly, like a rumor spreading, until it stopped being a small film and became a cultural obsession. After Fargo came out, something strange happened in real life. People did not just watch the movie and move on. They started hunting for proof. The opening claim about it being a true story felt so firm, so official, that a lot of viewers took it like a challenge. So reporters did what reporters do. They went digging. Soon you had journalists, reviewers, and true crime fans scanning Minnesota records from 1987. like they were looking for a missing puzzle piece. Some went to Brainerd, some went to Fargo. Others drove through the smaller towns the movie named, knocking on doors, calling police departments, pulling old clippings, and flipping through archives like the answer had to be hiding somewhere in the snow. Months passed. The searches kept circling back to the same cold result. No kidnapping matched the plot. No wood chipper murder lined up with the story. Nothing. The movie had planted a trail, and the trail did not lead to a real case. Yet the hunger for a real crime did not die easily. And that is where the confusion got even louder. The closest thing people could point to was not even in the same year. It was November 15, 2001, when a bow hunter found the body of Takako Konishi, a 28-year-old Japanese office worker, in a snow-covered field near Detroit Lakes, Minnesota. The details sounded like they belonged in the same universe as Fargo, which is why the rumors stuck so fast. But the truth was different, and far more personal. Police found no major injuries, no sign of sexual assault, no clear fatal medical condition. Toxicology showed 6 different drugs in her system, including sedatives and tranquilizers, but none at a lethal level. The autopsy could not pinpoint an exact cause of death, even though investigators believed she may have been trying to end her life by lying down in the freezing cold. 2 empty champagne bottles were found nearby, but there was no alcohol in her bloodstream. And before all of that, she had been in Bismarck, North Dakota, telling local police she was searching for something. That one detail was enough to light a match. Then came the famous misunderstanding. Konishi had limited English, and the language barrier turned her words into a story other people wanted to hear. She showed police a crude hand-drawn map that seemed to include Fargo and $1,000. To outsiders, it sounded like she had crossed an ocean to chase the movie's buried money. News outlets grabbed it, headlines got dramatic, and suddenly the world had an urban legend. A Japanese woman chasing fictional treasure lost in real snow. But when people looked closer, the legend did not hold. Later reporting tied her trip to heartbreak, including a relationship with a married American businessman and the pain after it fell apart. She sent a suicide note to her parents from Bismarck. She got rid of most of her belongings. She made a 40-minute emotional phone call to her former lover in Singapore. She withdrew money from her bank account. The map was not some treasure clue. It was more likely a misunderstood drawing, maybe a way to communicate distress, maybe just a messy attempt to explain where she had been. Still, the myth kept moving because myths are easy to repeat, and real grief is harder to explain. And the wild part is how all of this traces back to one simple trick. Fargo's true story frame felt so believable that it pulled in even professionals. Early on, plenty of critics treated that claim like it was real. Roger Ebert called it one of the best films he had ever seen. He and Gene Siskel both named Fargo the best film of 1996. Reviews kept praising the gritty detail, the clean police work, the dark humor that somehow made the violence feel even sharper. And there is that moment people still quote, when Siskel leaned over at the end and told Ebert, "This is why I go to the movies." That is not a line someone whispers when they think they just watched a clever lie. That is what people say when the story hits them like truth. That belief helped the film grow in a slow, quiet way. Fargo opened in March 1996 with a small release, only 36 theaters, and it earned $730,265 in its first weekend. That was only about 3% of its total domestic gross, which is the kind of start that makes studios nervous. Some probably assumed it would fade quickly, but it did the opposite. Word spread. People kept telling other people. The theater count rose until it hit 716 at its peak. And the box office legs became legendary. A multiplier of 8.73, meaning it earned nearly 9 times its opening weekend by the time its run ended. In the end, it made $24.6 million domestically and over $60 million worldwide, including about $36 million internationally. All of that on a $7 million budget. Once the movie had that kind of momentum, the Oscars were almost inevitable, and they turned Fargo into something bigger than an indie hit. At the 69th Academy Awards in March 1997, it received 7 nominations: Best Picture, Best Director, Best Actress for Frances McDormand, Best Supporting Actor for William H. Macy, Best Original Screenplay, Best Cinematography, and Best Film Editing. It won 2 major ones. McDormand took Best Actress. Joel and Ethan Coen took Best Original Screenplay. And even though the true story claim was still floating around in interviews and marketing like a fog, nobody could deny what the movie had pulled off. McDormand's win mattered because it was not loud. It was steady. Her Marge Gunderson is pregnant, calm, polite, and sharp as a blade. And in that year, she beat a tough field, including Emily Watson in Breaking the Waves and Brenda Blethyn in Secrets and Lies, both seen as serious contenders. She became the 3rd actress to win an Oscar for playing a pregnant woman, after Jane Wyman and Marlee Matlin. She also collected a Golden Globe, a BAFTA, and piles of critics' awards for the role. And years later, Fargo would be remembered as the first of her 3 Best Actress Oscar wins, along with 3 Billboards and Nomadland. But right there in 1997, it already felt like a quiet message from the Academy. Sometimes the most powerful performance is the one that does not beg for attention. Then the Coens won Best Original Screenplay, which is where the irony starts smiling. Because original is the key word. The script was fiction, fully crafted, yet it had been packaged with that opening claim that sounded like a police report. Their writing was praised for mixing dry Midwest humor with sudden brutality and strange humanity. They beat competition that included The Birdcage and Everyone Says I Love You. Their win locked in their reputation as writers who could do anything. But the question would not go away. How much of it was real? How much was based on a true story? People kept asking like they were trying to solve a riddle, and the Coens did not rush to clear it up. The uncertainty helped the myth live longer, because a clear answer would have ended the fun. And it really was a kind of prank, even if the consequences later got messy. That tension shows up even inside the movie itself, especially in small moments that feel like they are not supposed to matter. But then, they change everything. Take the Mike Yanagita scene around 26:30 to 30 row. Marge meets an old classmate who suddenly breaks down and tells her his wife died of cancer. Later, she learns from a mutual friend that Mike is mentally ill and was never married. It is a small lie in a story full of bigger crimes, yet it flips a switch in her mind. If someone harmless can lie straight to her face, then anyone can. It sharpens her instincts. It pushes her to look harder at Jerry Lundegaard, and that pressure ripples through the rest of the film. The scene feels like a little warning, slipped in quietly, like the movie is teaching you how easy it is to trust the wrong story. And speaking of Jerry, William H. Macy's performance became so iconic that even people who do not remember his name remember his panic. He did not win the Oscar, losing to Cuba Gooding Jr. for Jerry Maguire. But his nomination mattered. That category also included Armin Mueller-Stahl for Shine, Edward Norton for Primal Fear, and James Woods for Ghosts of Mississippi. Macy's Jerry is nervous, sweaty, always talking too fast, always trying to sell the lie. Even tiny things became famous, like him doodling at his desk, a detail he improvised that made Jerry feel even more real. Some fans still argue he should have won. What is clear is that Fargo opened doors for him, later leading to big roles and eventually a decade as Frank Gallagher on Shameless. Meanwhile, the film's reputation kept spreading into places the Coens probably never expected, including arguments about identity and accent. When Fargo premiered in 1996, some Minnesotans felt mocked. The movie's stage Minnesotan voice leaned hard on "Yeah, you betcha" and "Don'tcha know," and locals said it did not match how most people spoke in Minneapolis or St. Paul. Some even said the sound was closer to the Upper Peninsula Yooper dialect than modern Minnesota speech. The dialect coach, Elizabeth Himmelstein, created something that Hollywood treated as authentic, yet plenty of actual Minnesotans cringed when they heard it. And once that accent got famous, it became a national joke, which meant the fake version started replacing the real one in people's minds. Even awards season had its own strange echoes. Fargo competed at Cannes in 1996 and was nominated for the Palme d'Or, the festival's top prize. It lost to Mike Leigh's Secrets and Lies, but Joel Coen did win Best Director. Some people saw that as a consolation prize. Others argued it fit perfectly because the Coen's direction was so precise, so controlled, so confident. Either way, it showed Fargo was not just a hit at home, it was respected worldwide. Then, as years passed, the curtain finally slipped in a way that should have ended the argument, but somehow did not. Around 1998 to 2000, Joel Coen admitted in the New York Times that the story was made up, and he summed it up with the idea that the only true thing about it was that it was a story. Some people missed it because the news cycle had moved on. Fargo had already won. The brothers were already onto other projects, so the confession landed softly instead of exploding. And because it landed softly, the myth stayed alive anyway. It got fact-checked, too. In 1998, Snopes published a detailed piece looking into the true story claim and concluded the plot was fabricated. It also pointed out the end disclaimer that the film's persons were fictional, which many viewers never think about because the opening message is what sticks in the brain. Snopes also addressed rumors about real inspirations, including the Hellecrafts murder, which involved a wood chipper but did not match Fargo beyond that one shocking detail. Even with that kind of clear debunking, people kept repeating the myth because the movie had trained them to want it. And the Coens did not exactly help the myth die. Even after admitting the truth, later DVD releases included extras that looked like documentary material about true crime inspirations, with fake interviews and staged archival-style footage. It was another layer of the joke, another wink that blurred the line again. If you were already confused, those extras did not guide you back to reality. They pulled you further into the fog. That is how Fargo kept working on people long after the credits. It made audiences hungry for a real case that never existed. It made critics praise it like a true crime masterpiece. It made journalists chase 1987 records that did not match anything. It helped a tragic 2001 death get wrapped inside a myth it never belonged to. It created debates about accents, about identity, about whether a lie becomes acceptable if it produces art.